We often hear about the fog of war, right? But
Mm.
what does that truly feel like on the ground? I mean, picture the chaos of Ramadi, Iraq, back in 2006.
Yeah.
It's this city under siege, really the epicenter of the insurgency, where split-second decisions have absolutely life or death consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine you're leading a mission, kicks off before dawn, multiple friendly units spread out across hostile territory, and your communications are strained, unreliable at best.
Right, just a recipe for confusion.
Exactly. And suddenly your comms just crackle with frantic reports. U.S. troops wounded, Iraqi soldiers killed, heavy resistance popping up everywhere.
What chaos.
Then you get the news that just sends a chill right down your spine.
Oh.
A blue-on-blue incident.
Yeah.
Friendly fire.
Oh, man. The worst case scenario.
An Iraqi soldier dead, one of your own SEALs wounded, and this horrifying realization that American air support was literally moments away from bombing a building occupied by your own men.
Wow.
That's the kind of, high-stakes life or death crucible from which the lessons we're diving into today were really forged.
Precisely. And this deep dive is centered on extreme ownership, the groundbreaking book by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. And these guys, they aren't just authors writing from afar.
No.
They are U.S. Navy SEAL officers who actually commanded Task Unit Bruiser in Ramadi during the absolute most intense urban combat of the entire Iraq War.
Right.
They led their teams, built these high-performance units under pressure that's frankly unimaginable for most of us, and their unit became the most highly decorated special operations unit from that conflict.
Incredible.
What's truly remarkable, though, is after their combat tours, they didn't just, hang up their uniforms. They dedicated themselves to teaching these battle-tested principles, first to the next generation of SEAL leaders, which makes sense.
Sure.
But then, and this is profound, they transitioned these exact insights directly into the civilian business world. And their work, it's deeply rooted in the memory of fallen SEALs like Mark Lee, Mike Monsoor, and Ryan Jobe. That really underscores the weight, the real-world efficacy of the principles they share.
And this isn't just about, compelling war stories, although it definitely has those.
It certainly does.
This is about a proven formula for success, a mindset, a set of guiding principles that didn't just enable these extraordinary results on the battlefield. They've been directly translated, applied to transform leadership in basically any context. Boardroom, startup garage, doesn't matter.
Exactly.
So our mission today, really, is to give you a true shortcut, a deep understanding of these critical insights into leadership, drawing right from the battlefield's ultimate test. It's about taking those hard-won lessons and showing you how to actually implement them in your own world.
Yeah, our goal is to help you understand not just what these principles are because you can read the concepts, but how to genuinely wield them. As the authors themselves emphasize, these concepts are, and I quote, directly applicable to success in any group, organization, corporation, business, and, to a broader degree, life.
Right. It's universal.
It really is. We're here to help you move beyond just conceptual understanding to actual practical application, equipping you to achieve victory in your own challenges, whether you're leading a huge team, managing a complex project, or honestly just navigating your daily responsibility. It's about making these concepts real and actionable for you.
Okay, so let's unpack this foundational mindset then. Extreme ownership, starting with that really harrowing combat crucible from Chapter 1.
Oh.
The scene is Ramadi, Iraq, during this large-scale offensive Operation Iron Gavel.
Right.
Leif Babin's SEAL task unit is right in the thick of it, operating under what they call the fog of war, which is just this chaotic environment of, confusion, often inaccurate intel, broken comms, pure mayhem all around. And amidst all this, an element of Iraqi soldiers, U.S. Army soldiers, and SEALs are meticulously clearing buildings house by house when, inadvertently, a rogue element of Iraqi soldiers strays outside their assigned boundaries.
Not good.
Not good at all. In the pre-dawn darkness, they attempt to enter a building that's already occupied by a SEAL sniper team. The SEALs, seeing these silhouettes of armed men approaching their position, fearing an enemy assault, they engage.
And that's when it just spirals completely out of control. Gunfire erupts from the house. The Iraqi soldiers outside immediately return fire, pulling back behind cover, naturally assuming they're facing enemy fighters.
Of course.
Then U.S. Marines and Army troops nearby, they hear this barrage and they respond with just a vicious amount of suppressive fire, mistakenly believing the house is packed with insurgents.
Oh my gosh.
What's truly terrifying, as you mentioned, is that a Marine Angelico team came perilously close to directing airstrikes brakes on the very building where Babin's own SEALs were holed up.
Unbelievable.
Then a P-50 column machine gun opens up on their position from a nearby rooftop, prompting the pinned-down SEALs to call in heavy QRF Quick Reaction Force Abrams tanks for support. It's just a total maelstrom of confusion. Friendly forces unknowingly engaging each other.
The dread that Babin describes in the book, it's immediate, it's palpable. He recounts feeling physically sick, this visceral wish that he himself had died on the battlefield rather than endure this outcome.
Heavy stuff.
Incredibly heavy. When he finally gets back to base, his email inbox is just overflowing, including this stark, blunt message from his commanding officer, his co. Shut down. Conduct no more operations. Investigating officer, Command Master Chief, and I are en route.
Oof. Yeah, for anyone in the military, that is not a message you want to receive.
No, it's the unambiguous code for someone is about to be fired, and it might just be you. He knows they're coming to find blame, to assign fault for this catastrophe.
And this right here is where the true turning point happens, the actual genesis of extreme ownership as a concept. As Babin's gathering information for this impending, probably career-ending debriefing, he compiles this long list of individual and unit mistakes.
Sure.
Altered plans, missed notifications, ambiguous communication, the Iraqi army adjusting plans without telling them, insufficient positive ID of targets before engaging. The list goes on.
The whole chain of errors.
The whole chain. But despite this myriad of errors from multiple people, multiple units, he has this profound, almost shattering realization. No matter how many people made mistakes down the line, there was only one person ultimately to blame: himself.
Wow.
As the SEAL Task Unit commander, the senior leader on the ground, he was absolutely responsible for everything that went wrong, period. So he made this radical decision to take complete ownership of the failure, even if it meant the absolute end of his SEAL career.
And he actually did it. In that silent, incredibly tense debriefing room, with his CO, the investigating officer, his own wounded SEAL right there, he actually cuts off every subordinate who tries to step up and take blame for their part.
Yeah, he recounts asking, whose fault was this? Almost rhetorically. And each SEAL tries to own their piece. The SEAL who engaged the Iraqi soldier, clearly devastated, says, "It was my fault."
Heartbreaking.
Babin responds firmly, "No. It wasn't your fault." He pushes, then finally declares, his voice just cutting through the tension, "There is only one person to blame for this. Me. I am the commander. I am responsible for the entire operation. I will make sure that nothing like this ever happens to us again."
That level of accountability, I mean, in that moment, with those stakes,
Yeah.
it's truly remarkable. Could you walk us through what that debriefing room actually felt like? What was the immediate effect of him saying, "It's all on me"?
Well, it was an act that just completely reshaped the atmosphere in that room. You can imagine the shock, right? But then, almost immediately, this sense of relief. Not just for his SEALs, who were clearly ready to fall on their swords, but probably even for his superiors.
Really? Why them?
Because what's often counterintuitive about this kind of radical self-blame, it's on me, is that it's not about martyrdom or self-pity. It is the absolute most direct path to immediate problem solving. When the leader owns the failure completely, the team's natural defensive posture just collapses. Instantly. Suddenly, nobody is focused on assigning blame or protecting themselves. Everyone shifts to finding solutions. How do we prevent this?
Ah, okay. It removes the finger pointing.
Completely. It creates this sort of psychological safety net that accelerates learning and adaptation faster than almost any other approach. Babin's act was the absolute antithesis of what they later call the tortured genius mindset, where individuals just deflect blame constantly. He embraced the full, weighty burden of command, and in doing that, he unlocked the ability for his entire team to learn, adapt, and prevent future incidents, ultimately saving lives.
That's a really powerful reframing, turning what seems like a moment of vulnerability into actually the ultimate strength. But for leaders maybe new to this idea, how do they overcome that natural human instinct to deflect blame, especially when the stakes feel incredibly high, like they did in Ramadi?
Yeah, that's the absolute crux of it, isn't it? It requires a really profound internal shift, a redefinition of what control and power actually mean in leadership. Instead of viewing blame deflection as like a shield to protect yourself,
Right.
You have to start seeing it as a self-imposed cage that prevents you from solving anything real. The initial resistance is almost universal because our ego tells us that admitting fault makes us look weak.
Yeah, that's the fear.
But extreme ownership flips that entirely. Owning it actually makes you appear incredibly strong, credible, and capable of genuine improvement. It's a calculated risk, sure, but the payoff in trust and team performance is absolutely immense.
So what does this mean for us, beyond the battlefield? The principle itself is crystal clear. On any team, in any organization, all responsibility for success and failure rests with the leader. The leader must own everything in his or her world. There is no one else to blame. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. This isn't just some catchy phrase to put on a poster.
Not at all.
It's a fundamental shift in how you view problems and, crucially, your role in solving them.
Absolutely. Extreme ownership isn't some limited scope concept that only applies to, the final outcome. It encompasses everything.
Everything. Like what?
That means taking responsibility for clearly explaining the mission, the why, for developing effective tactics, for securing the necessary training and resources for your team. And yes, even for managing the performance or the lack of performance of your subordinates.
So if someone on my team isn't performing, that's on me.
According to this principle, yes. It's your responsibility to train them, to mentor them, or, if necessary, to make the tough call to remove and replace them for the good of the team and the mission. It absolutely mandates setting your ego completely aside.
Sounds hard.
It is hard. Being willing to admit your own failures without hesitation, actively attacking weaknesses within yourself and your team, and continuously working to build a better, more capable team. And here's the paradox. Truly effective leaders, according to this, bestow all credit for success onto their subordinates, while unflinchingly taking all the blame for failures themselves. It's a complete inversion of typical organizational behavior, right?
Okay.
Where blame rolls downhill and credit rolls up. And it's remarkably effective.
Okay, let's look at a business application from the book that really drives this home. There's this story about a VP of manufacturing.
Right.
This VP was overseeing a crucial plant consolidation plan. Super important project, vital to the company's bottom line, but it was struggling badly. It was way behind schedule, over budget.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of looking inward asking, what am I doing wrong? He consistently blamed external factors, particularly the distribution managers, citing their unfounded fears about face-to-face interaction and needing rush orders as the reason for all the delays. His job was very much on the line.
So when Leif Babin, now acting as a consultant from their company, Echelon Front, arrived to coach him, he used a really indirect but powerful approach. He didn't just walk in and say, "You're wrong."
Yeah.
He shared his own battlefield experience, that blue-on-blue incident, owning mistakes regardless of who technically messed up. And then he told the VP, quite bluntly, "Your people don't need to be fired. They need to be led."
Ouch. Direct.
Very direct. The VP initially resisted, clearly still externalizing blame. He seemed to believe his extensive knowledge of the business somehow insulated him from needing to accept fault. He even appeared to feel he knew better than some of the board members who were questioning the project.
The ego creeping in.
Big time. But Babin pressed the point. He explained that truly effective leaders accept blame, they actively seek constructive criticism, and they continuously improve. He explicitly told the VP he must assume total ownership of the failure to implement your new plan. You are to blame. And that is exactly what you need to tell the board.
Wow. Tell the board it's his fault. That takes guts.
It does. And crucially, Babin stressed he had to believe it, not just say the words performatively. This was vital because, as Babin explained, the board would respect this genuine display of extreme ownership. They'd see it as a profound sign of strength, of integrity, a real commitment to improvement, rather than seeing it as a weakness to exploit.
That makes sense. It shows you're serious about fixing it.
Exactly. And this brings to mind that common trap we all fall into sometimes. How often do we, as leaders, find ourselves identifying external reasons for what are actually internal struggles or failures within our own area of responsibility?
Guilty as charged sometimes.
We all are. The core lesson here is that only by owning the problem, by accepting that you are responsible for finding and implementing the solution, can you truly find that solution and genuinely empower your team to achieve it. The VP in the story, after some initial reluctance and probably a very difficult internal battle with his own ego, he finally embraced the concept, and by taking that humbling, difficult step, he completely transformed his approach. He started actively engaging with those distribution managers he'd been blaming, listening to their legitimate concerns about process, about resource allocation, rather than just dismissing them as unfounded fears.
So he started collaborating instead of blaming.
Precisely. He worked with them to build a revised plan, secure the needed resources, remove the obstacles they were facing. And the project, once stalled and failing, wasn't just turned around, it actually exceeded expectations. It's about instilling that winning mindset, that sense of shared purpose, into the team's culture, radiating from the top down.
Okay, moving on to some of the core leadership principles in action. One of the most powerful, and maybe counterintuitive, especially if you're coming from a corporate background, is this idea: no bad teams, only bad leaders.
Yeah, this one hits hard.
And the book hammers this home with a truly grueling SEAL Hell Week scenario involving these boat crews. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, Hell Week is just an absolute gauntlet.
Understatement of the year.
Right. 72 hours of nonstop physical exertion, minimal sleep, maybe an hour or two total if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Extreme cold from the Pacific Ocean. It's designed not just to test physical endurance, but maybe more importantly, your mental fortitude, your determination, your sheer will to keep going when everything screams stop.
It's insane. It's brutal. It pushes human limits in ways most people can't comprehend. Students are constantly soaked, covered head to toe in sand, shivering uncontrollably, pushed right to the brink of exhaustion and hypothermia. Dozens quit. They ring the bell 3 times, DDoR, drop on request.
Yeah.
It's designed to break you down completely to see if you have that internal drive to rebuild yourself and keep fighting for the team. Students are divided into these 7-man boat crews, each assigned a heavy 200-pound inflatable boat, an IBS that they have to carry everywhere, run with, paddle through surf. And the boat crew leader is explicitly made responsible for the performance of his crew.
And the instructors. They're merciless, constantly yelling, "It pays to be a winner," because the winning crews, they get maybe a few minutes of precious, dream-inducing rest.
Which feels like heaven in that state.
While the losing crews, they endure immediate additional punishment. More push-ups in the surf, more running with the boat overhead.
Constant pressure.
And then there's Boat Crew the 6th. They are consistently the worst. Every single drill, every race, they are dead last, constantly lagging, getting absolutely hammered with extra punishment. And their leader, he seems almost indifferent, constantly blaming his underperformers, the guys on his crew.
Yeah, you can almost feel the demoralization just seeping into their bones through the writing. The instructor staff is all over them, forcing them to sprint, bear crawl, hold the boat overhead until their arms shake. It's painfully clear this leader just believes fate dealt him a poor hand, a team that just couldn't get the job done. He's totally resigned to their failure.
So an instructor who happens to be Leif Babin, watching this unfold as the officer in charge of that Hell Week shift, makes this truly dramatic, almost theatrical swap.
Right.
He takes the leader of the worst crew, Boat Crew the 6th, and swaps him with the leader of the best crew, Boat Crew 2.
A bold move.
Yeah. The original leader of Boat Crew the 6th is visibly elated, right? He's certain his underperformers were the only problem, and now he's looking forward to leading a winning team, getting some rest.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, the leader of Boat Crew the 2nd is clearly unhappy, maybe even distraught, to leave his high-performing team and inherit this crew that's been failing miserably.
A tough position for him.
And what happens next is just nothing short of miraculous, really, and deeply instructive for leadership. Boat Crew the 6th, under their new leadership, immediately goes from dead last to first, winning most of the subsequent races.
Incredibly.
Meanwhile, the original leader of Boat Crew the 6th, now with the formerly top-performing Boat Crew the 2nd, struggles. He can't motivate them, they start to falter, they start losing races. It's this undeniable, glaring example of the principle. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders.
It really is astonishing, that immediate turnaround.
It's almost unbelievable. So how did that new leader, the guy who inherited the supposed worst team, how did he affect such an immediate and dramatic shift? What specific, tangible actions did he take in that brutal environment that the previous leader just completely failed to grasp?
Well, it wasn't magic, right? It was pure leadership in action under extreme duress. New leader of Boat Crew the 6th, he didn't just shout louder or demand more effort abstractly. He immediately understood his new team's mindset, which was one of defeat, maybe even self-pity.
Right, they've been losing constantly.
Exactly, and he refused to tolerate that. Instead, he started leading from the front. Quite literally. He'd be the first one to jump into the freezing water. He'd pull the heaviest load on the boat. He physically demonstrated the pace and the effort he expected.
Leading by example.
Absolutely. He constantly pushed, encouraged, and focused them on immediate, achievable micro-victories. Let's get to that next buoy. Just get through the set of waves. He celebrated the smallest gains, building momentum. He shifted their focus from the overwhelming 72 hours of hell to just the next 50 meters, the next paddle stroke. He ignited belief where there was none.
Breaking it down.
Yes, and crucially, he also recognized the importance of taking care of his men, even in that extreme environment, making sure they properly secured their gear, which minimized those petty punishments from instructors. Simple things, but they showed he cared. The previous leader simply resigned himself to failure and blamed his crew. The new leader saw only his responsibility to lead them to victory, regardless of their past performance. He owned it.
That's a powerful point. The leader's attitude, their belief, it's just contagious, isn't it? For better or for worse.
Absolutely. It sets the tone for everything.
Now, let's see how this translates directly to a business scenario. The book talks about a CEO who hires echelon front because his company is deeply struggling after a major new product rollout failed spectacularly.
Right.
The chief technology officer, the CTO, is quickly identified as the primary problem. This guy shamelessly blames everything else. Market conditions, inexperienced personnel on his team, poor communication from other departments, even the senior executive team for the failure. He absolutely refuses to take any ownership, seeing himself as this kind of island of competence in a sea of mediocrity.
Yeah, the CTO perfectly embodies that tortured genius concept we mentioned earlier. And again, this isn't about mental health. It's a specific, identifiable leadership flaw. Someone, despite obvious failings, accepts zero responsibility, makes endless excuses, blames everyone else. They're often genuinely convinced that others just don't appreciate their genius.
Sounds insufferable.
It is. And this mindset, as the book powerfully explains, has a catastrophic, insidious impact on a team's performance, especially when it permeates from the top. It creates this toxic culture of blame and deflection throughout the entire organization. People learn quickly, if the boss blames everyone else, maybe I should too.
So the CEO, after consulting with Echelon Front and hearing this diagnosis, faces a really painful decision, right?
Extremely painful. He realizes that the saying, "It's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate," is absolutely true. By tolerating the CTO's behavior, he was implicitly condoning it, undermining his own leadership and the company's values. So he makes the tough call. He fires the CTO.
Wow. Even though the CTO might have had technical skills.
Even so, because the damage to the team and the culture was outweighing any individual contribution. The result: a new CTO comes in, someone with an extreme ownership mindset. And almost immediately, you see cross-departmental teamwork improve, the company starts to rebound, becomes profitable again, and eventually experiences significant growth.
So what does this all mean? It's a powerful lesson that sometimes the most difficult decisions, like firing someone who's technically competent but culturally destructive, are the ones that actually save the entire mission, whether that mission is winning a war or saving a company.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the behavior and mindset of just one individual at the top can permeate and fundamentally define the culture and performance of an entire team. Whether you're talking about a sailboat crew on the beach or a technology division in a corporation, leadership is the single greatest factor.
Okay, so if the leader is truly the single greatest factor, as we just saw with those boat crews and the CTO, what then is the most crucial internal element that leader absolutely must possess to be effective? I imagine it has something to do with the concept of believe that you discuss in Chapter 3.
Precisely. Because a leader can take all the ownership in the world, right? They can be the best tactician, they can check their ego, they can even fire a tortured genius. But if they don't truly fundamentally believe in the mission they're asking their team to potentially risk everything for,
Then it all falls apart.
then all that effort is ultimately for nothing. Belief is the fuel. This principle starts with a really significant challenge for the SEALs back in Ramadi. They are ordered to work by, with, and through the Iraqi army.
Okay.
Now, the authors describe the SEALs, understandably, as a professional sports team, exceptionally well-trained, highly conditioned, best gear imaginable. And then you have the Iraqi soldiers, often poorly trained, frequently ill-equipped, sometimes unmotivated, prone to desertion, and occasionally with questionable loyalty. Not exactly an ideal partnership.
Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster, honestly. The initial reaction from Jocko and his SEALs was, you can imagine, pretty visceral. Hell no. It just wasn't worth the
Yes,
risk.
the understandable reaction.
To imagine fighting alongside such a force seemed outrageous, maybe even suicidal, certainly counter to all their training and instincts for self-preservation and relying on highly competent teammates. They deeply questioned the validity of this mission.
But as Task Unit Bruiser's commander, Jocko knew his actions, his mindset, carried immense weight. He couldn't afford to project doubt even if he felt it. He had to lead, which meant he first had to find a way to believe in this mission himself. So he kept his personal doubts quiet and asked himself that simple but profound question, a core leadership tool: why? Why are we being asked to do this seemingly impossible thing?
And what was the why he found?
The why he uncovered wasn't just tactical, it was deeply strategic, looking at the long game. He understood that if the U.S. didn't actively build up the Iraqi forces, if they didn't empower a local government and military capable of standing on its own, well, America would be stuck here securing their country for them for generations.
The long-term implication?
Exactly. The mission wasn't necessarily to transform the Iraqi army into SEAL-level fighters overnight. That was impossible. But it was to crush the insurgency to a point where the Iraqi soldiers could eventually maintain peace and security on their own, allowing U.S. forces to eventually leave. This understanding, this comprehension of the larger strategic imperative, that's what transformed his perspective. It allowed him to genuinely believe in the mission's importance, even if it felt impossibly difficult and risky day to day.
Okay, so he found his own belief. But the next critical step was communicating that why effectively to his SEALs, right? The guys actually putting their lives on the line alongside the Iraqis.
Absolutely crucial. He didn't expect them to suddenly jump for joy or ignore the very real dangers. That would be naive. But he ensured they understood the strategic imperative, the bigger picture. This belief, this shared understanding of the overarching goal, that's what enabled all their subsequent successful missions in Ramadi. It transformed what could have easily been begrudging, resentful compliance into genuine conviction and a commitment to purpose, even when fighting alongside less than ideal partners under incredibly dangerous conditions.
Well, that makes a huge difference.
It really does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, in any organization, how often do teams feel disconnected or unmotivated? Maybe because they just don't grasp the why behind the directives they're given or the seemingly arbitrary changes coming down from above. This principle bridges that gap. Understanding the why aligns goals, it empowers teams to prioritize their efforts effectively and execute with conviction, even when faced with tasks they might initially question or find difficult, like a tough new product launch or a difficult organizational restructure. If a leader doesn't genuinely believe in the mission deep down, well, the book is blunt. You are failing as a leader and you are failing your team.
So the responsibility falls on the leader to get that clarity.
Squarely. The leader has to ask questions up the chain, seek clarity, push back if necessary until they understand the full picture, the strategic rationale, and then confidently, clearly pass that understanding down to their team. Without that belief, without that shared why, any team, no matter how talented, will eventually falter or underperform. Belief is the engine.
Okay, next up, check the ego. This sounds like a big one, and a principle that, if you ignore it, impacts literally everything from planning to execution to teamwork.
Absolutely fundamental, and the book illustrates this, starting with Task Unit Bruiser's arrival in Ramadi. When these SEALs first hit the ground in this total war zone, they were confident, maybe, as you said, even a little cocky.
Understandable, given their reputation and training.
Sure, they had advanced training, elite status, superior gear. They were, by definition, the best of the best. They expected to dominate.
But reality hit hard.
They got a very harsh wake-up call very quickly. First, the level of determination, the sophistication, and the sheer lethality from the insurgent fighters was alarming, far beyond what many of them had seen before. But what truly humbled them, according to the book, was witnessing the incredible heroism and the brutal effectiveness of the conventional U.S. soldiers and Marines who had already been grinding it out in Ramadi for months.
The regular Army and Marines.
Yeah, the guys facing these well-coordinated, complex attacks daily. These conventional forces, sometimes maybe dismissed by special operations units in other contexts, were absolutely the real deal in Ramadi. Fighting off relentless mortar attacks, machine gun ambushes, RPGs, VBOR-EEs, vehicle-borne IEDs, car bombs with incredible resilience and courage, seeing that forced a major reevaluation of their own perceived superiority.
So it wasn't just about fighting the enemy, but also fighting their own preconceptions.
Exactly. The issue was that some special operations units, and maybe even a few SEALs initially, viewed themselves as a cut above. They often preferred operating independently in their own bubble, which inevitably caused friction, communication breakdowns, and ultimately undermined the overall war effort.
Right, if everyone's doing their own thing.
Yeah. It doesn't work. For the U.S. forces to genuinely win in Ramadi, everyone had to work together seamlessly. Jocko understood this viscerally. And he didn't just tell his men. He insisted on professionalism from task unit bruiser that projected respect things like squared-away uniforms, proper military haircuts, not looking like rogue operators. And he actively sought ways to work with conventional units, not just operate near them.
Building bridges, essentially.
Building bridges, fostering mutual respect. And this humility, this effort forged incredibly strong bonds. It led to vital mutual support in the heat of battle, like Abrams tanks providing heavy fire support for SEALs pinned down, and SEALs providing crucial sniper overwatch for Army and Marine units during dangerous clearing operations. That synergy was critical.
The book shares a really illuminating anecdote about ego, though. There's a SEAL platoon commander described as excellent at his craft, but he expresses concern to Jocko that the Iraqi soldiers they were training might eventually become better than us and take over our mission. And this led him to consider maybe not sharing information effectively or even subtly hindering their progress.
Yeah, and Jocko immediately identified this insidious thought process for what it was. Pure ego. A fear of being overshadowed, a desire for the unit to remain indispensable rather than focusing on the overall mission success, which actually required the Iraqis to get better. It highlights that even highly capable, well-intentioned individuals can be blinded by their own ego, jeopardizing the mission for some perceived personal or unit superiority.
So the core principle here is that ego clouds and disrupts everything. Absolutely everything. The planning process, the ability to take good advice, the ability to accept constructive criticism, it just gets in the way.
It prioritizes personal agendas, individual recognition, or maybe unit glory over the ultimate mission success. True extreme ownership absolutely requires leaders to set that ego completely aside, to readily admit failures, to aggressively attack their own weaknesses, and to continuously work to build a better, more unified team while always crediting success to their subordinates.
This example really highlights how those personal dynamics, that internal ego struggle, can derail even the best intentions. It shows that even the most accomplished leaders aren't perfect, and ego can be their absolute toughest adversary.
It really can. And this brings a really important practical question to the forefront, especially in business. How do you balance the need for retaining highly experienced, maybe even indispensable talent, the rock stars, with the absolute imperative for humility and adherence to standards and the overall mission?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Like the business example with Gary, the leader who had that experienced subordinate bypassing channels.
Exactly. Gary was struggling because the subordinate had vast experience, was critical to the team, but consistently bypassed proper channels, likely thinking he knew better. Gary feared losing this critical team member if he critiqued him, partly because of the subordinate's ego and partly because the guy probably had high market value.
A common dilemma.
Very common. Gary had to understand, through coaching from Jocko in this case, that letting this behavior continue wasn't just tolerating substandard performance or process violations. It was actively undermining team cohesion and the mission itself. Jocko didn't just tell him to crack down, he challenged Gary's perception of his own responsibility. He specifically advised Gary to sit down with the subordinate, not in an accusatory way, but to reiterate the overarching mission and the non-negotiable principle that it's not about you, it's about the mission and how best to accomplish it.
Reframing it around the mission, not the person.
Precisely. He advised framing it as a necessary adjustment for the team's success, emphasizing the subordinate's immense value while clearly outlining the expectations for adherence to established processes for the good of everyone. This firm but respectful confrontation, rooted firmly in the mission, allowed Gary to retain a valuable team member while realigning his behavior, preventing that individual ego from corrupting the entire team's mission. It's about addressing the behavior, not attacking the person, but being absolutely clear on the standards.
Okay, moving into part 2 of the book, which they call the laws of combat. These feel like more tactical principles, but they apply just as powerfully to business strategy and teamwork. Let's start with cover and move from chapter 5.
A classic military tactic with huge implications.
Yeah, and it's exemplified by a critical combat scenario. SEALs providing sniper overwatch for U.S. Army and Iraqi troops who are conducting these dangerous cordon and search operations in Ramadi. Their job is essentially to protect these ground troops from elevated positions as they move through incredibly dangerous enemy-held neighborhoods, clearing houses one by one.
Right. The SEALs, from their sniper positions, are constantly scanning, identifying threats, engaging enemy fighters, disrupting attacks often before they can even fully materialize. These cordon and search ops were completed successfully, often with no American or Iraqi casualties on the ground, thanks in large part to this coordinated overwatch. They were literally providing cover.
But then comes the move part. Standard procedure dictated that these SEAL Overwatch teams should remain in position until nightfall for a safer extraction under the cover of darkness.
Makes sense tactically.
But for OP2, Leif Babin's specific team in this instance, remaining in their technically vulnerable building, presented increasing risks as the day wore on. The enemy absolutely knew where they were after hours of observation and occasional shooting. A serious counterattack in daylight was becoming highly probable.
So the risk assessment changed.
Exactly. They had to move in broad daylight against normal procedure because the calculated risk of staying put was now greater than the risk of moving. As they patrolled back towards their base, Cop Falcon, bam! Fully automatic gunfire erupts from their rear. Insurgent fighters engage them heavily, pinning them down in the open.
A bad spot to be in.
Terrible. Amidst the chaos, the SEALs immediately execute a centerpeel maneuver. It's this perfectly coordinated tactic where two columns of operators systematically alternate, shooting suppressive fire at the enemy and moving away in a safe direction. One team provides covering fire, the other moves back, then they instantly reverse roles, leapfrogging to safety under constant enemy fire. It's this incredible dance of mutual reliance and trust.
Textbook cover and move. Disciplined teamwork ensuring their safety under intense fire. It allowed them to effectively repel the enemy attack, break contact, and extract successfully with no casualties on their side. It's an awesome, visceral display of coordinated action and that profound trust they have in each other.
So the principle is universal. Cover and move is this fundamental tactic meaning mutual support. All elements of a team, doesn't matter what their individual roles are, must work together, supporting each other to achieve the common mission. The mantra is simple. No one is left to fight alone. It demands trusting your teammates implicitly and actively, looking out for their well-being and their success, because their success is your success.
It really is. It's about understanding that you're interconnected.
And it's amazing how that simple shift in mindset, from maybe blame or isolation to collaboration and mutual support, can lead to such massive improvements. It often feels like magic, but it's just good leadership fostering teamwork.
Exactly.
This is perfectly illustrated in the business application described, involving a production manager. He was struggling with significant downtime in his manufacturing plant, hurting profits, causing delays, and he shamelessly blamed a subsidiary company, another part of the same parent organization, deeming them horrible, and the full reason for his team's issues. He created this real us versus them mentality.
Yeah, the production manager initially saw them purely as adversaries, right? Externalizing the problem completely, fostering resentment within his own team, probably complaining about them constantly. But through coaching, applying the cover and move principle, he learned to proactively, positively engage with that subsidiary, going beyond just formal meetings to genuinely understand their challenges, like their limited resources, their manpower constraints, how their own performance metrics influence their decisions.
Seeing it from their side.
Exactly. And he realized with that jolt of extreme ownership that if he wasn't actively working with them, figuring out ways to support their success, well, then he was effectively failing his own team because their problems were directly impacting his results. Their problems were his problems.
So with this profound shift in mindset, what did he actually do? He didn't just tell his team to stop complaining, right?
No, action was key. He actively encouraged his team to see the subsidiary not as an enemy, but as critical resources, as teammates in the larger mission of the company. He started involving them in joint coordination meetings. Not just managers, but frontline team members from both sides, building relationships.
Getting the actual workers talking.
Yes. He specifically tasked his own team to identify 3 concrete ways they could support the subsidiary's goals each week, rather than just waiting for the subsidiary to fix his problems.
Oh.
This reciprocal approach, this how can we help you mindset, coupled with openly sharing performance metrics across both teams, built immediate empathy and trust.
Did it work?
Dramatically. For instance, they discovered a small inventory management issue on his side was causing significant downstream delays for the subsidiary, a problem easily fixed once it was openly discussed without blame. The us versus them mentality just evaporated, silos broke down organically, and production downtime. It drastically improved to industry-leading levels.
Why? Just by changing the relationship.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, This highlights the critical importance of breaking down those organizational silos that plague so many companies. Every department, every team has to see themselves as part of the same overarching mission, providing cover and move for each other. When teams genuinely collaborate, when they see each other as indispensable allies rather than separate entities or worse, adversaries, they become a single, cohesive force working toward a common goal. That leads to much greater efficiency, faster problem solving, and ultimately much greater success for everyone. It's about proactive, continuous mutual support.
Okay, the next law of combat is simple. Keep it simple. Chapter 6. This is beautifully captured in a scenario involving a U.S. Army MIT-TT leader that's a military transition team in Ramadi.
Right, these teams work directly with Iraqi units.
Exactly. This particular leader was new to the city's extreme violence, and he had planned this patrol route that was, frankly, far too complex. It spanned multiple battle space owners, different military units with their own distinct areas of responsibility, and it went through areas known to be heavily seeded with IEDs. It just looked like a recipe for disaster on paper.
Too many variables, too many points of potential failure.
Precisely. So Jocko intervenes. Despite the MTT leader's confidence in his elaborate, probably very detailed plan, Jocko advises him, with his characteristic directness, keep it simple to start.
Great advice.
He suggests drastically shortening the route, keeping it entirely within a single company's battle space. This immediately minimizes complexities like needing different radio frequencies for communication, dealing with varying operating procedures between units, and needing multiple layers of approval or coordination for fire support or medevac. He understood that simplicity would be absolutely key for survival in this unpredictable, incredibly violent environment.
He was reducing the friction points?
Exactly. And guess what happens? 12 minutes. Just 12 minutes into that simplified patrol route, not the original complex one, a massive firefight erupts. Friendlies are wounded, chaos ensues, and they desperately need immediate casualty evacuation, case evac, and fire support. The situation is chaotic, deadly serious.
And the benefit of that simple plan becomes immediately starkly apparent. Because the plan was simple and clear, they knew exactly where they were, building J51. They knew what they needed, 2 wounded, need fire support, and they could communicate it clearly over a single radio net within that one company's battle space. Crucial help arrives swiftly. It prevents catastrophe.
If they'd been on that complex route.
Who knows? If the plan had been more complex, crossing boundaries, needing a relay through multiple command posts, different communication nets that maybe weren't compatible, that vital information could easily have been lost in translation, delayed, garbled, and the outcome for that patrol would likely have been catastrophic. Simplicity saved lives.
Simple, not easy. That phrase from Dean Lister, the jiu-jitsu champion Jocko quotes, it really sticks, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because often, achieving true simplicity is the hardest thing, especially when you're under pressure, or maybe when you feel the need to impress others with complexity.
Right, complexity can feel sophisticated.
But the principle is clear. Combat is simple, not easy. Simple plans are clear, concise, and understandable. When plans and orders are too complicated, people may not understand them. And when things inevitably go wrong, as they always do, people will not be able to adjust effectively to the new situation. The ultimate litmus test. The plan should be easily understandable by the most junior man, the newest recruit on the team with the least experience. If they get it, everyone gets it.
And this just exemplifies how complexity can actually obscure objectives and critically hinder performance, not just in combat, but everywhere. Consider the business application the book gives, a manufacturing plant's assembly technicians. They genuinely don't understand how their complex monthly bonuses are calculated. They don't know what specific metrics they should focus on day to day to maximize their earnings. As a result, productivity isn't maximized because they can't clearly connect their effort to their reward. It's demotivating.
But the managers probably thought the system was brilliant.
Oh, yeah. The plant manager and the chief engineer, in a classic display of maybe intellectual ego, are actually proud of their staggeringly complex system. They explain its calculation involving base weights, variable weight curves, tiered efficiency metrics, graduated fault systems for quality control. It's this intricate academic exercise.
Sounds like my tax forms.
Exactly. It's not a practical incentive for the people actually doing the work. So the consultants, applying the simple principle, advise ruthlessly simplifying the bonus structure. Focus it on just 2, maybe 3, easily understandable, directly controllable key metrics.
And the result?
An immediate and significant increase in productivity. Why? Because the employees could suddenly, clearly connect their daily actions, hit this target, maintain this quality level directly to what made them money. It aligned their personal incentives perfectly with the company's goals.
That makes sense.
And a side benefit: lower performers, who maybe couldn't hide behind the complexity anymore, were quickly identified. They either had to improve their output to meet the clear standards, or they were let go, leading to increased overall efficiency and profitability for the plant.
So by simplifying those metrics, the company empowered its employees.
Absolutely. They empowered them to directly connect their actions to tangible results, which drove efficiency and accountability naturally. This applies to any complex system or goal in business, or life, really. Leaders must ruthlessly simplify things to ensure clarity, foster understanding, and enable effective action. When things are simple, people understand the objective, and when they understand, they are empowered to execute with precision and purpose, creating far better results than navigating needless complexity. It's about removing that cognitive load, making the path to success unmistakable.
Our next principle is prioritize and execute, from Chapter 7. This one is vividly demonstrated in a really intense combat scenario back in Ramadi. SEALs are pinned down inside a building after hours of heavy enemy fire, and they're facing what seems like an insurmountable number of simultaneous critical threats.
Yeah, the situation is described as utterly dire. Their only easy exit from the building they're in is completely blocked by a newly discovered massive improvised explosive device, an IED, planted right outside the door while they were inside.
Terrifying. Trapped.
Essentially. Jumping from the windows with all their heavy gear is deemed too dangerous, too high a risk of injury, and they don't have ropes suitable for rappelling. On top of that, there's a wounded SEAL inside who fell through the roof during the fighting. There's an exposed rooftop position that's vulnerable to enemy sniper fire. There's that ticking IED that could detonate at any moment. And there's a locked gate to another potential exit route. It's described as a hell of a dilemma, a true hornet's nest of escalating problems, all screaming for immediate attention.
Okay, so multiple crises happening at once. How do you even begin to deal with that?
Amidst this absolute chaos, Leif Babin's extensive training kicks in. He doesn't panic, he doesn't freeze. He mentally cuts through the noise, ignores the less immediate threats for a moment, and decisively identifies the single highest priority for sheer survival. His command is simple, yet incredibly powerful in that moment. Set security.
Security first, even with a wounded man and a bomb.
Yes. Even though every instinct might scream to help the wounded man or deal with the bomb immediately, the immediate, overwhelming priority is to establish a strong defensive perimeter first, prevent further casualties from external enemy threats who are likely closing in, secure the perimeter, stop the bleeding of more casualties.
Okay, that makes sense. Stabilize the situation.
Exactly. Then, while that crucial security is being established, other tasks are executed concurrently, but in a clearly prioritized sequence based on urgency and feasibility. They start breaking through a concrete wall with a sledgehammer to create an alternate exit. Meanwhile, EOD operators' explosive ordnance disposal are working diligently and very carefully to assess and potentially neutralize the IED threat.
A lot happening at once, but focused.
Focused and sequenced. They successfully breach a new exit through the wall, they clear the building methodically, room by room, and they move to safety just as the IED detonates, presumably remotely by the enemy or perhaps by EOD action. All personnel are accounted for and safe. It worked.
Wow. Close call.
Extremely. The principle is crystal clear from this. Leaders must determine the highest priority task and execute that task first. Then, and only then, can the team move on to the next highest priority task. Right, the classic everything is priority one problem.
Exactly. Multiple new product launches, building new distribution centers, trying to break into new international markets, implementing new training programs, overhauling the website, restructuring the entire sales force. It's dizzying. And he actually asks the consultant, Leif in this case, what his highest priority should be, clearly indicating that he himself is spread thin, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of urgent tasks he's initiated.
And this really highlights that realm of uncertainty Karl von Clausewitz wrote about, which isn't just confined to battlefields. It happens in business constantly. Leaders have to be comfortable making decisions with incomplete information, making the best call now, and then adapting fluidly. The consultant advises the CEO to focus relentlessly on one highest priority in this case. They identified Salesforce activity management as the linchpin and drive that single initiative until it gains real momentum, until it's a self-sustaining force within the company.
So ignore everything else for a while.
Not ignore, but deprioritize actively. It meant, for example, the CEO had to consciously stop initiating new marketing campaigns or actively scouting for new distribution center locations for a defined period. Put those on the back burner and focus the entire organization's energy on the number one thing.
Did the company do it? And did it work?
They did. With newfound, sometimes painful focus, the company poured all its available efforts into that single initiative, revitalizing the sales force. This involved targeted training, maybe new incentive structures, streamlining CRM usage, holding sales leaders strictly accountable for specific activity metrics. The singular focus led to quick, measurable progress. Sales figures started to tick up. And maybe just as importantly, it created a unified company effort that had been completely missing before. The CEO quickly recognized the profound effectiveness of prioritize and execute. By resisting the urge to tackle everything at once, he gained significant leverage and propelled the company forward, achieving more by doing less initially, and it illustrates that crucial point. Even when every initiative seems critical, true effectiveness comes from sequential focus, not attempting simultaneous, diluted effort. Diluting effort across too many priorities often leads to stagnation or outright failure on all fronts. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts for an organization. By directing all available resources and attention to the single most important task first, leaders can create breakthroughs and build momentum that then fuels subsequent successes down the line. It's about deliberate, focused action, not frantic, unfocused activity.
Next, we have a really key structural principle, decentralized command, from Chapter 8. As the task unit bruiser commander, Jocko faced this immense challenge of managing, over 30 SEALs plus Iraqi soldiers, all spread out across a complex, incredibly hostile urban battlefield in Ramadi.
Yeah, it's simply impossible for one person to effectively micromanage dozens of individuals directly in that kind of dynamic, high-threat environment. Nor should they even try. It would create an impossible bottleneck and paralyze the entire operation while the leader tries to process everything.
So the solution was decentralized command. Can you break that down?
It means breaking the larger force down into smaller, manageable elements. Typically, they found 4 to 6 operators was the sweet spot, each with a clearly designated, highly competent junior leader in charge of that element. And crucially, these junior leaders weren't just order takers. They were unleashed to make decisions on the ground within the bounds of the overall mission plan.
So they had real authority.
Real authority and real responsibility. They were expected to state, this is what I am going to do based on their assessment of the immediate situation, not constantly ask, what do I do? This trust and empowerment freed up the senior leaders, like Jocko, to focus on the bigger picture. They could coordinate strategic assets like air support or tanks, monitor overall enemy activity, manage communication between different elements, essentially orchestrate the battle, while the frontline leaders handled the immediate tactical decisions within their smaller areas of operation.
The book provides a really powerful real-world example of this working perfectly. Delta Platoon finds they can't use their pre-planned sniper position because of unexpected enemy activity.
Right.
So autonomously, the junior leader on the ground identifies and moves his team to a new, suitable building nearby, Building 94, to set up their overwatch. This decision, made quickly on the ground by that empowered junior leader, is immediately relayed up the chain of command.
And this rapid communication enabled by decentralized command is critical because moments later, a U.S. Army Bradley fighting vehicle mistakenly identifies Building 94, where the SEALs just moved, as an enemy position and prepares to engage it.
Oh no, another blue-on-blue near miss.
Exactly. But because the senior commander, Jocko, knew Delta Platoon's new location, thanks to that update from the junior leader, he could intervene just in time over the radio, preventing a potential friendly fire tragedy. Decentralized command worked, but the communication piece was vital.
It really makes you think about how we structure our teams in business, doesn't it? Is your organizational chart truly optimized for leadership and rapid decision-making at the lowest appropriate level? Or is it creating unnecessary bottlenecks and slowing everything down?
It's a critical question. The principle states that human leaders are inherently limited in effectively managing more than, say, 6 to 10 people directly. Trying to manage more just leads to overload and inefficiency. Teams must be broken down into manageable elements. But for this to work effectively, those junior leaders must clearly understand the commander's intent.
That why again?
That why again, the overall objective, the purpose behind the mission. And then they need to be fully empowered and trusted to make tactical decisions that align with that intent. Senior leaders have to foster profound trust in their subordinates, which frees them up to focus on the strategic landscape, while the tactical battles are handled efficiently at the front lines by those closest to the action who have the best situational awareness.
In the business world, this is exemplified by that company president whose branches range drastically in size, from just 2 people up to 22 people, but they all reported directly to a single branch manager.
Right, a classic span of control problem. The larger branches, maybe 15, 22 people, often succeeded because they had strong managers who were forced to delegate and lead effectively. They simply couldn't micromanage that many people. But the smaller branches struggled. Why? Because the managers there, only having a few direct reports, often felt compelled to do a lot of the frontline work themselves, like sales, rather than focusing on leading and developing their small team. They weren't really managing. They were often just super salespeople with a manager title.
Leading to ineffective management and that span of control issue you mentioned.
Exactly. And it raises that important question again. How do you ensure clear communication and unified effort when command is decentralized, when decisions are being made out at the edge? It comes back to the commander's intent, that clear why, and the overarching strategic goal. That serves as the guiding star, allowing leaders at all levels to make independent decisions that still contribute constructively to the overall mission. Jocko explains in the book that even when he commanded maybe 150 personnel in total, he could only truly lead, manage, and coordinate with about 4 to 6 direct subordinate leaders max.
Wow, only 4 to 6 direct reports for him.
That was his effective span of control for deep leadership. So he advised that president to restructure his branches into a hierarchy of manageable elements. Even in smaller branches, maybe have a team lead under the branch manager, empowering those junior leaders and focusing them on leadership tasks rather than being pulled solely into frontline sales or operations. This structure allowed the senior leader to focus on strategy, while the tactical execution was handled efficiently at the front lines, and it scaled much more effectively as the company grew.
Chapter 9 brings us to plan. The importance of planning. This is perhaps one of the most directly applicable laws of combat for anyone in any field, especially business. The scenario used is incredibly high stakes. A hostage rescue mission in Ramadi.
Yeah, the stakes couldn't be higher. A young Iraqi teenager has been kidnapped by terrorists and is being threatened with beheading, often publicly, as a gruesome propaganda tool. Time is absolutely critical, likely measured in minutes or hours, not days.
So they put together an initial plan.
Yes, a solid initial plan is rapidly developed for the breach, the clearing of the building, and the hostage rescue. It involves SEAL snipers for overwatch, assault elements, vehicles for transport and support, even air support on standby. Crucially, they leverage every available resource and piece of expertise, including collaborating closely with a U.S. Army major who is deeply familiar with that specific neighborhood, ensuring the plan was grounded in local reality, not just generic tactics. This meticulous collaborative planning process itself is highlighted as a key aspect of their potential success, not just some procedural hurdle to check off.
Okay, solid plan. But then the curveball. Just before they launch the mission, new last-minute intelligence crackles in over the radio.
The worst kind.
It reveals IEDs buried in the yard and bunkered machine gun positions at the target location. These are deadly, unexpected threats that could immediately compromise the entire mission and cost lives before they even reach the door. Most units facing that might halt, replan completely, maybe even abort the mission.
That would be the cautious, maybe standard response, but here's the critical decision point that illustrates the principle. Despite these new, potentially catastrophic threats, they don't replan from scratch. They assess the new intel, confirm its credibility, but they decide to proceed with the existing plan. Why? Because, as the book states, we had already taken those things into account and planned accordingly.
How could they have planned for unknown IEDs and bunkers?
Their initial plan, because it was meticulously developed by experienced leaders, already included contingencies for encountering unexpected resistance or obstacles. It emphasized core principles like maintaining surprise through speed and overwhelming force during the initial breach, and rapid, decisive execution inside the target building. Their planning wasn't about creating a perfect, unchangeable blueprint for a predictable situation. It was about developing a robust, adaptable framework that anticipated variables, built-in flexibility, and allowed for dynamic adjustment in the face of the unknown. They trusted their plan's core structure and their team's ability to adapt.
So planning for contingencies was key. And the result?
Hostage rescued successfully. No casualties on the SEAL or supporting Iraqi side. A successful mission attributed directly to solid mission planning skills. There's even a detail where the Iraqi soldiers involved, despite initial fear at the doorstep, are literally flung through the door by the SEAL assaulters, emphasizing the need for decisive, forceful action and execution, even if it requires direct physical encouragement when lives are on the line and hesitation could be fatal.
Wow. That really underscores the intensity.
It really does. And what's fascinating here is reflecting on how the often needless and burdensome planning process seen in typical military training environments sometimes focused more on impressing the instructors, with complex PowerPoint slides transformed into this lean, ruthlessly effective system when the stakes were absolutely real, life and death. It underscores that planning isn't just a bureaucratic hurdle. It's a vital tool for survival and success.
So what does good planning look like according to this principle?
It begins with comprehensive mission analysis, truly understanding the objective and the constraints, and clear directives from leadership, the commander's intent. It involves exploring different potential courses of action, gathering detailed intelligence and information from all available sources, and critically, delegating parts of the planning down the chain of command, empowering junior leaders to develop the detailed plans for their specific segments of the operation.
Getting buy-in from below.
Exactly. It requires troop participation for buy-in, ensuring everyone understands their role and the roles of those around them. A clear understanding of the strategic mission, the commander's intent, specific team missions, individual roles clarified, and, crucially, robust contingency planning. What if X happens? What if Y fails?
And risk. How does risk fit in?
A good plan meticulously calculates risk. SEALs don't avoid risk. That's impossible in their line of work and often necessary to achieve the objective. Instead, they focus on mitigating as much risk as possible that can be controlled, things like timing, routes, tactics, equipment checks, while simultaneously accepting the inherent unmitigable risks that just come with the territory. And finally, post-operational debriefs are absolutely critical for continuous improvement.
The learning loop.
The vital learning loop, honestly and dispassionately analyzing what went right, what went wrong, how can we adapt our plan or our execution to improve next time. This constant, ego-free self-examination fuels improvement and prevents the same mistakes from being made twice.
That translates so directly to business projects. The business application mentioned is a successful VP of emerging markets.
Right. He recognizes that his company's aggressive growth strategy, pushing into new territories rapidly, requires a standardized process for planning, a repeatable checklist others with less experience can follow. He couldn't be everywhere, planning every market entry himself.
He needed to scale the planning process.
Exactly. He'd noticed that traditional military operations orders, or OPER, which he was familiar with, were often overly complex, sometimes focused more on bureaucratic completeness than on clarity for the executors. This ties back to the simple principle applied to planning.
So Jocko advises him.
Jocko advises simplifying the planning brief relentlessly. Strip away unnecessary jargon. Focus on absolute clarity for those who will actually be executing the mission. Use simple tools like maps, sketches, clear timelines, and crucially, have the teams who will execute brief their own parts of the plan back to leadership. This ensures true understanding and fosters buy-in. The VP adopts this adapted, simplified planning process, significantly improving efficiency and effectiveness in their rapid expansion efforts.
It's a universal truth, isn't it? A plan, no matter how brilliant it looks on paper, is utterly worthless if it cannot be clearly understood and flawlessly executed by the team on the ground.
Absolutely. By making the planning process repeatable, simple, and easily understood, even less experienced personnel can contribute effectively, which drastically scales the company's ability to enter new markets or launch new projects efficiently. It transforms what could be a bureaucratic drag into a lean, effective tool for strategic growth and consistent execution.
Okay, now we move into the final section of the book, Sustaining Victory. These feel like more advanced, maybe nuanced leadership concepts, starting with leading up and down the chain of command in Chapter 10.
Yeah, this acknowledges that leadership isn't just about managing your direct reports.
Right. Leif Babin, upon returning from that intense Ramadi deployment, had this deeply personal revelation about leading down the chain of command more effectively. He realizes, with real regret, he should have done a far better job of routinely providing his SEAL operators with the greater context or the strategic overview, the why behind their grueling missions.
His SEALs were operating in relentless 117-degree heat, carrying crushing loads of gear, engaged in constant, brutal firefights, risking their lives literally every single day. They absolutely needed to understand how their daily, often incredibly dangerous tactical tasks contributed to the bigger picture, the Anbar Awakening. How their sacrifices were helping stabilize Ramadi, secure the populace, and fundamentally change the tide of the war in that critical province.
Connecting the dots for them.
Connecting the dots. This realization underscores a vital principle for all leaders. Senior leaders must routinely communicate the why of the overall mission down to junior leaders and the frontline troops. Consistently connecting those daily tasks, the sometimes monotonous or difficult grind, to the overarching strategic goals. This fosters genuine understanding, builds profound buy-in, prevents that feeling of, why are we doing this? And absolutely facilitates effective decentralized command because people understand the goal they're driving towards.
Makes sense. But then there's the other direction, the challenge of leading up the chain.
Often harder, politically.
Yeah. Leif and Jocko were initially, and understandably, furious with what they perceived as ludicrous questions and staggering amounts of paperwork required by their higher headquarters, their CO, based back in Fallujah, miles away from the Ramadi battlefield.
Right. They felt this bureaucracy was draining their focus from the immediate fight, wasting precious time they needed for planning and rest, and maybe even putting their men at unnecessary risk by delaying approvals or demanding irrelevant information. They saw it purely as out-of-touch bureaucracy hindering their life-or-death mission.
A common feeling for people on the front lines dealing with HQ.
Very common. But Jocko, displaying that remarkable perspective again, had a critical shift in his thinking. He realized their superiors weren't bad guys. They weren't incompetent bureaucrats intentionally trying to make their lives difficult. They were good people trying to do their jobs under their own immense pressures and, critically, with limited information about the realities on the ground in Ramadi. We can't expect them to be mind readers, he stated. It wasn't HQ's fault they didn't understand. It was their, Jocko and Leif's, fault for not communicating clearly enough upwards. We have to lead them.
Wow. Taking ownership even for his boss's lack of understanding.
That's extreme ownership in action, leading up. This meant proactively launching what they called a systematic campaign of leading up the chain of command. They started providing extremely detailed mission planning documents, comprehensive post-operational reports explaining not just what happened, but why certain risks were necessary and how they were mitigated. They even invited their CO and his key staff members to come visit Ramadi to witness the brutal realities firsthand to build that understanding. They became educators for their own bosses, not just executors.
And did that work? Did HQ get off their backs?
It was transformative. The CO and his staff developed profound trust in Task Unit Bruiser. They recognized their competence, the thoroughness of their planning, their sound judgment. This trust led to much faster approvals for their ambitious combat missions and, crucially, allowed Task Unit Bruiser to have a significant, decisive impact on the battlefield because they weren't constantly fighting bureaucratic friction.
It's such a powerful lesson in empathy, isn't it? Taking the time to understand the pressures on your leaders, even if those pressures seem distant or irrelevant from your frontline perspective, and proactively helping them succeed. Well, that's truly advanced leadership. It's about taking ownership of the entire chain of command, not just your direct reports downwards.
Absolutely. And it raises that important practical question. How do you ensure effective communication flows smoothly, both up and down the chain, especially when teams are geographically separated or when the big picture feels disconnected from the daily grind? It requires deliberate, consistent effort from the leader in the middle to build trust and shared understanding across all levels, regardless of rank or distance. The principle is clear. Support your boss. Understand their priorities and information needs. Present a united front once a decision is made. And if you disagree with the decision before it's made, argue your point professionally, provide data, but once the decision is final, execute it as if it were your own brilliant idea. And constantly, proactively push situational awareness up the chain so that those above you have the comprehensive information they need to make informed decisions and, critically, support your team's efforts without hesitation or needless questions. It's really about making your boss's job easier, which, counterintuitively, makes your job and your team's job much more effective in the long run.
Next, we tackle decisiveness amid uncertainty from Chapter 11. This principle is vividly, chillingly portrayed through that intense scenario involving Chris Kyle's sniper dilemma in Ramadi.
Yeah, a truly harrowing moment described in the book. Kyle, the legendary SEAL sniper, American sniper, spots what appears to be a guy with a scoped weapon in a window of a building, Building 127. Enemy snipers are an incredibly deadly threat in Ramadi, responsible for many casualties.
Right, a high-priority target.
Absolutely. The U.S. Army company commander on the ground with Kyle's team, feeling the immense pressure of protecting his own troops in the area, insists urgently, take that guy out now.
The weight of potential American casualties looms heavily if they don't act immediately to neutralize this perceived threat.
But there's a hesitation. There's a profound dilemma, an agonizing decision point for Leif Babin, the SEAL platoon commander on site. What if it's not an enemy sniper? What if it's a friendly U.S. soldier in that building? That would be the worst of all outcomes. A catastrophic blue-on-blue incident with irreversible consequences. Kyle himself lived by the rule his father taught him. Know your target and what is beyond it. Positive identification is paramount.
So what does Leif do under that intense pressure?
Despite the intense pressure from the Army commander, the clear and present danger if it is an enemy sniper, Leif holds his ground. He takes that crucial moment to breathe, process the available but incomplete and ambiguous information, and makes the incredibly difficult, counterintuitive decision in that moment. We cannot engage, hold fire. Instead, he orders the Army ground troops to clear that building physically first, to positively confirm the identity of the person inside.
Taking the slower, safer route, despite the urgency.
Exactly, and the discovery. It turns out U.S. soldiers were operating in the adjacent building, Building 126, and the guy with the scoped weapon seen fleetingly in Building 127 was actually a U.S. soldier moving across a window in the adjacent building, a trick of the light, a misidentification in the heat of the moment. It was an agonizingly close one.
Wow.
And the key point Leif makes is the responsibility for that shot, had it been taken, regardless of who physically pulled the trigger, would have landed squarely on him as the commander who authorized it. This incident hammers home that decisive action doesn't mean hasty action. Some decisions, especially those involving life and death, are irreversible, and the consequences of being wrong are absolutely catastrophic. Sometimes the most decisive action is to pause and gather more information, if possible.
So the principle emphasizes that in chaotic, high-stakes situations, leaders almost never have the full picture. Information's always incomplete, often conflicting, sometimes deliberately misleading or delayed.
Always. Leaders cannot be paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice, because inaction can be just as deadly. But they must make the best decisions they can based on only the immediate information available, and, critically, be ready to adjust those decisions quickly as new information flows in or the situation evolves. The big trap is waiting for the 100% right and certain solution, because in dynamic environments like combat or even fast-moving business markets, that perfect clarity rarely, if ever, comes before the window for effective action closes. Decisiveness means making the best possible call with what you have, taking calculated risk, executing, and then adapting fluidly.
That's a masterclass in making the tough call under pressure. And it proves that sometimes inaction or indecision, waiting too long for perfect information, is the most dangerous decision of all. The business application provided about Darla's feuding senior engineers mirrors this beautifully.
It really does. Darla, the CEO of a successful engineering subsidiary, is facing a major crisis. Two of her highly competitive senior engineers, Eduardo and Nigel, are both absolutely critical to her company's operations, possessing deep knowledge and leading key teams. Yet they are openly feuding, undermining each other, creating factions. Each is demanding the other be fired. Worse, they're rumored to be interviewing elsewhere, potentially threatening a mass exodus of vital talent if one or both leave and take their teams with them. Darla is completely uncertain and unclear on what to do, paralyzed by the potential fallout of any decision she makes.
A nightmare scenario for a CEO.
Absolutely. Darla initially considers just letting this play its course, basically hoping it resolves itself, which it rarely does, or making the incredibly difficult choice to fire just one of them, but she's unable to decide which one would cause less disruption or which one is more right. She's stuck in indecision.
So Jocko and Leif intervene as consultants.
Yes, and they push hard for decisiveness. Jocko throws out a third option, which is initially received with incredulity by Darla. You could fire them both.
Fire both critical engineers. Risky.
Extremely risky on the surface. But they analyze the situation coolly. Neither of these guys, despite their technical prowess, is actually behaving like a stellar leader in the true sense. They are actively plotting against each other, harming team performance, destroying morale. And crucially, they deduced that the real key knowledge and operational expertise likely reside with the frontline troops, the actual engineers doing the work day to day, not necessarily just with these two feuding, ego-driven leaders. They asked Darla a really pointed question. Do you want to be seen by your entire organization as someone who can be held hostage by key employees as indecisive?
Oof. That question probably cut right through the paralysis.
It did. Darla, importantly, with the backing and support from Jim, the parent company CEO who practiced extreme ownership himself, makes the incredibly difficult but decisive choice. She fires both feuding senior engineers simultaneously.
Wow, what was the fallout?
There was immediate turbulence, no doubt. Some short-term disruption as responsibilities were reassigned. But Darla communicated clearly and openly to the remaining team why this drastic decision was made to remove toxic obstacles to collaboration, to uphold standards of leadership behavior, and to enable true teamwork. High-potential frontline personnel were then promoted into those vacant leadership roles, given a chance to step up, and the company, surprisingly quickly to many, rebounds. Morale improves, collaboration increases, performance picks back up.
It illustrates that leadership requires that nuanced understanding of risk. Some risks are inherent to the mission, right? But the risk of indecision or the risk of tolerating mediocrity or toxic behavior, especially at leadership levels, can be far more catastrophic to the organization in the long run.
Absolutely. This is a powerful demonstration that decisiveness isn't about being rash or impulsive. It's about having the courage to make the best possible decision you can with incomplete information, understanding the potentially severe consequences of inaction, and then executing that decision firmly, clearly, and taking ownership of the outcome. Sometimes, surgically removing the cancerous elements, no matter how seemingly valuable their individual contributions might appear on paper, is the only way to save the health and integrity of the whole organization. It's about protecting the long-term mission and the well-being of the entire team over the short-term discomfort or fear associated with a tough but necessary decision.
Finally, we come to the last chapter's principle. Discipline equals freedom. The dichotomy of leadership. This title itself sounds like a contradiction, right? Discipline and freedom.
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance, but it's a really profound concept. It's brilliantly illustrated by the SEALs problem back in Ramadi with searching target buildings for intelligence after a raid. Initially, maybe with minimal specific training on this particular task, the platoons would simply ransack target buildings, just tear through them looking for weapons, documents, anything valuable, creating absolute chaos in the process.
Fast and messy.
Fast and messy, which meant they inevitably missed critical evidence, couldn't properly document what they did find, and, maybe worst of all, it took way too long, typically around 45 minutes, to thoroughly, chaotically search each building. This prolonged time spent inside a potentially hostile building significantly increased their vulnerability to enemy counterattack.
So the lack of discipline was actually increasing risk.
Precisely. Then, things got more complicated. New, stricter Iraqi court system requirements came into effect for evidence collection, demanding things like precise chain of custody records and meticulous documentation for anything seized to be admissible in court. This made the old, undisciplined, chaotic ransacking method even more problematic. It wasn't just inefficient, it actively jeopardized their ability to gather actionable intelligence that could lead to convictions.
So they needed a new system.
They did. An assistant platoon commander, an AOIC, steps up. Recognizing the need for a solution rooted in discipline, he develops a simple plan, there's that word again, for a systematic, methodical search procedure. It involved designated search teams, assigning room owners responsible for specific tasks within each cleared room, like sketching the layout, labeling evidence, taking video, taking photos, collecting items, and clear marking of rooms once they were searched and cleared. It was a structured, disciplined approach to what was previously a chaotic problem.
How did the SEALs react to this new structured process? These are guys used to high autonomy.
There was initial dissent, absolutely, which is a common human reaction to change, especially in post-structure. Veteran SEALs resisted, saying things like, this will take too long, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and even, this bureaucratic process is going to get somebody killed because it's too slow. They feared the discipline would hinder them.
But the AOIC persisted.
He did. Through persistent leadership, clear communication of the why, the new legal requirements, the need for better intel, and crucially, demonstrating the proof through repeated training runs and drills, he showed them the benefits. The disciplined search time drastically reduced from that chaotic 45 minutes down to a consistent, efficient 10 minutes per building. The guys were now believers, the book says.
Wow. Discipline made them faster and more effective.
Massively faster, more effective, more efficient. They missed less evidence, the evidence they gathered was usable, and, critically, the dramatically reduced time spent on target directly decreased their risk of ambush and casualties. Discipline created freedom, freedom from unnecessary risk, freedom to move faster, freedom from flawed intelligence.
So the principle discipline equals freedom. It's counterintuitive but profound. It applies everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
While discipline often implies control, restriction, regimen, it actually leads to greater freedom and capability in the long run. For an individual, waking up early every day, discipline, creates more free time later for personal pursuits or work. Consistent physical training, discipline, makes heavy gear feel lighter in combat or allows you to hike further, giving you more freedom of movement and endurance.
Makes sense.
For a team, the more disciplined standard operating procedures, SOPs, a team employs, the more freedom they have to practice decentralized command effectively, and thus they can execute faster, sharper, and more efficiently. Good SOPs handle the routine, freeing up cognitive space for creativity, problem solving, and adaptation when the unexpected happens. Discipline provides the foundation for agility.
And this ties into the second part of the chapter titled, The Dichotomy of Leadership. What does that mean?
It means that effective leadership requires constantly balancing seemingly contradictory qualities. It's not about being either this or that. It's about being both this and that, in the right measure at the right time. Think about it. A leader needs to be able to lead decisively and be ready to follow when someone else has a better plan or more expertise. They need to be aggressive in pursuing goals and prudent in assessing risks.
Close to their team to build trust and distant enough sometimes for objective judgment or making hard calls.
Exactly. Confident to inspire action and humble enough to admit mistakes and learn. Disciplined in execution and flexible enough to adapt. The tension between these opposing qualities is where true leadership mastery lies. It's a constant balancing act.
This is a really profound point. It's not about being a robot or rigidly adhering to one style. It's about understanding these opposing forces that are always at play and finding that critical dynamic balance point for each situation.
That's the art of leadership. And the business application illustrates this perfectly with the unprofitable electrical division. A company's CFO reveals to the CEO, Andy, that the electrical division is losing significant money, acting as a major drain on capital needed for other profitable ventures. The CFO questions why Andy keeps it open, as it clearly jeopardizes the financial stability of the entire company.
So why is Andy keeping it open?
The problem, it turns out, is that Andy is keeping it open primarily out of misguided loyalty to his friend Mike, who is the CEO of that failing division. This misplaced loyalty itself being a strength, but here applied incorrectly, is out of equilibrium. It's jeopardizing the mission, the overall company's health, for the sake of one individual relationship. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. Other leaders see it. They see the drain on resources, the clear favoritism, and it subtly undermines Andy's leadership credibility across the board.
The dichotomy of loyalty, good in principle, bad when unbalanced.
Exactly. The consultant uses the dichotomy of leadership principle to challenge Andy directly, maybe uncomfortably, asking something like, so one of your men, your friend, is more important than the mission, more important than the health of the entire company and everyone else who depends on it. He explains that loyalty, a profound strength in any leader, can become a critical weakness if it's allowed to operate out of equilibrium, prioritizing an individual friendship over the health and survival of the entire organization.
That must have been a tough conversation for Andy.
No doubt. Andy, forced to confront this uncomfortable truth, recognizes his loyalty is misplaced in this context. He exercises the necessary discipline to shut this hatch. He makes the tough but strategically correct call to close down the unprofitable electrical division.
And the result for the company? And his friendship.
The division is shut down, preserving crucial company capital that can now be reinvested in profitable areas. And crucially, Mike, his friend, ultimately understands the decision was necessary for the greater good of the company. Their friendship, built on mutual respect, remains intact. Mike's expertise is even reincorporated elsewhere within the company in a more productive role. The cost savings allow investment in the profitable divisions, leading to significant overall company growth. It demonstrates that discipline, making the hard but right call when properly applied and balanced with other leadership qualities like empathy and communication, unlocks genuine freedom for the organization to thrive. And it raises that final important question for self-reflection. Where are you, as a leader, potentially letting a strength become a weakness? letting loyalty cloud judgment, letting confidence become arrogance, letting aggression override prudence. True leadership isn't about rigid adherence to one extreme, but the agile, disciplined ability to navigate and constantly rebalance these seemingly contradictory demands to best serve the mission.
Wow, what a deep dive that was. We've taken these principles forged in the absolute crucible of combat in Ramadi and meticulously explored how they translate, almost directly, to the complex challenges, the firefights you face every day in your work and life.
Yeah, from that foundational mindset of extreme ownership, which completely shifts all responsibility squarely onto the leader,
No excuses.
to those core laws of combat. No bad teams, only bad leaders, the critical importance of believe in the mission, the constant need to check the ego, the teamwork ethic of cover and move, the power of keeping things simple, the focus of prioritize and execute, and the structural empowerment of decentralized command.
And then layering on those more advanced concepts for sustaining success, the necessity of leading up and down the chain, having the courage for decisiveness amid uncertainty, and understanding that counterintuitive but powerful link. Discipline equals freedom, embracing that economy of leadership. These aren't just abstract ideas or, cool-sounding military tactics.
Not at all. The common thread, the powerful through line in all these lessons, is that leadership is, without question, the single most important factor in whether any team, any organization, or even an individual succeeds or fails. And the encouraging part is, with the mindset of extreme ownership, paired with these actionable principles we've discussed, anyone can develop into a highly effective leader, regardless of their current title or position.
It's a skill set you can build.
Absolutely. These principles, when they're genuinely understood, internalized, and most importantly, consistently implemented, they don't just offer incremental improvements. They really do form a powerful, proven formula for success that leads to dramatically higher performance, better efficiency, increased productivity, and ultimately greater profitability and success in any endeavor. The profound power is truly in applying them, day in and day out, not just knowing them conceptually. It takes deliberate effort.
So let's end with this, a provocative thought for you, the listener. Consider this. If every problem in your world, every challenge, every obstacle, every team failure is truly your responsibility to solve, not someone else's fault, what then becomes possible? What becomes possible for you to change, to improve, to conquer, starting today? Take just a moment right now, maybe after this finishes. Identify just one area, one problem, one frustration in your life or work where you can fully apply extreme ownership immediately. Take 100% responsibility for finding the solution. You might be genuinely surprised at the transformation that follows when you stop looking for blame and start looking for answers within your control.